Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this Australasian College of Road Safety webinar on CLOCS-A. We'll just give it a minute while everyone joins us. We've got people joining from all over Australia and also from countries outside Australia as well. So there's obviously a lot of interest in this topic, which is fantastic with this CLOCS-A program kicking off. So I'll just start with acknowledging and paying our respects to the many First Nations of Australia who continue to be the sovereign custodians of their countries and the sovereignty of the Maori in New Zealand. We acknowledge the ongoing traditional custodians of the lands on which we live, work and learn, and pay our respects to elders who've passed on the legacy of knowledge and culture to the future generations. May this sharing of knowledge through Mataranga Maori and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of knowing, being and doing guide you with wisdom and courage as it enhances our collective futures. So thanks everyone for joining us today. This is all about the who, what, why, when, where of CLOCS-A. It's a Construction Logistics and Community Safety Australia good practice approach for managing the risks and impacts associated with a construction project's on-road transport and logistics activities to improve community road safety. It's developed to provide a consistent framework for industry to achieve. So we've got three speakers with us today, starting with Jerome Carslake, who is the Program Director of the National Road Safety Partnership Program, which provides free networking support and education and convenes working groups centred around key workplace road safety risks. Then Karen Welsh is the Chief Executive Officer of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, was previously the CEO for Go Freight and General Manager of Australia Post's Core Procure Division. And Matthew Moon is the Workplace Health and Safety Manager at Aconia, works extensively in construction in large infrastructure projects, both globally and in Australia. So we will start with Jerome. You're muted, Jerome.
That would help. Sorry about that. I'm absolutely excited to be here today and to be part of this webinar. I know this represents a major milestone for getting the program up since we've been championing it since back in 2016 when we did some webinars with Transport for London where we sort of drew on best practice. So well, look, when these instances and these opportunities are popping up, how can we use, I guess, major projects to influence and improve on road user safety? So as I sort of dive in, let's give it a little bit of origin first. This is really the why. Really goes back to, and there's been so many coronial inquests since these have taken place. So one of the great, sad examples, I should say, not great, was Rebecca Mayer when she was killed while cycling up in Brisbane. And what was really interesting with that coronial inquest, it didn't allocate blame to one sort of key group, but it referred to a systems-based approach that everyone has a role in the safety of reducing the risk of an interaction occurring between a vulnerable road user and a truck. And the key things was blind spots, the technology of the truck, the driver training, and the other part was making people aware of the blind spots around the truck and how to safely interact with it and where the truck should be located. So it was very much looking at a systems-based approach. But the other part is when you look at these sort of projects taking place in the construction sector, you can see an entire pipeline of these taking place. And we really began sort of identifying where this was going back in 2016 when we started exploring as to what these sort of represent with regards to risk, because a lot of these major infrastructure projects take place in the hearts of our cities. So when drawing on this, there's the CLOCS-A, the CLOCS program over in the UK, which is for a €55 billion project. And they said that they can't build those projects if they're going to be taking the lives of vulnerable road users when they do it. So that really became impetus for saying, what are we going to do and how are we going to reduce the risk? And the last thing I'll make a point on is construction projects by their nature are very unique. They're not a continuous supply chain. So they come together, they build up and they break down. So a lot of knowledge and how things are done are lost. And that's where the CLOCS-A will come in and it's sort of addressing that issue. So the aims, it's business as usual for a lot of organisations because they do components of this. It's about bringing it all together into one sort of component and helping everyone repeat, share and raise the standard up. And it's really aiming to ensure the safest, leanest and greenest construction vehicle journeys. And in doing so, it's about creating one single standard, and that will basically give confidence between the different sort of sectors It doesn't matter where you are in Australia, which state you're in. The aim is if you sign up to the CLOCS-A standard, it's the same for industry. It gives them confidence in how they can go through and meet those sort of requirements for industry's point of view. And they don't have variabilities moving between Australia's different states, different projects. So we even saw that a little bit between the major projects in Victoria and New South Wales. And look, we know it works. And this is a bit of an evaluation that was done of the CLOCS project over in the UK by the Parliamentary Advisory Committee for Transport Safety, PACS. So we sort of know it works. This was sort of guiding the underpinnings for why we sort of we're leading with CLOCS-A. The best thing is when you look at market pull-through, it is sitting in government action plans. It's sitting at the very top with National Road Safety Strategy. It's referenced in that, and that flows through in a number of state action plans as well. So, and these make it very, very clear that basically there'll be a CLOCS-A or a similar sort of approach needs to be put in place for the major infrastructure projects that take place in our major cities. So the way we accomplished this, like any sort of component, it was led by a major diverse group of industry champions who pulled it together. So this is just really the steering group, and NFCP sort of chaired and led it through funding provided by the National Heavy Vehicle Regulators Heavy Vehicle Safety Initiative, which is supported by the federal government. So without any of these organisations and the enormous 60 plus stakeholders that sat under it and another 30 supporting partners, none of this would have been possible. But this group really provided the leadership in taking it all forward. And the best thing is from NFCP, we did our part in sort of pulling together and achieving to where we are. And the best thing you'll be hearing from Karen soon, who's going to be taking it forward from Silda's point of view and introducing it. So what are we sort of talking about here? This is the big sort of picture. What we're sort of looking at was, I guess, the top for the three components in the hierarchy of controls. It was really about shifting the exposure in these high-risk areas. Unfortunately, a vulnerable road user in a truck interacting at 15 kilometres an hour will be fatal, unfortunately. And so the key thing is how can we reduce the chance, the risk of these sort of groups interacting whatsoever? And if we can reduce that interaction, we're sitting here in the major sort of three controls at the top, which is really around trying to eliminate those when they're happening. And that's where it comes in the logistics, not having the heavy vehicle and the vulnerable road users in the same sort of place at any other time. The next part going through into that element in the top sort of three controls is then the standards as well. So the truck technology can sort of kick in and we can raise those safety standards up as well. And that maps it all out in what we've pulled together. The lower two sit around the human side, and that's looking around the driver standard and the communication elements as well. So we really want to get drivers to understand and to have empathy with vulnerable road users, know what to look for, where the areas where they're sort of concentrated and being proactive and upskilled in those sort of areas. And I love to refer to it as empowering their spider sense, because they have it and it's really getting them to draw on that very, very powerfully. The last one then is the community, getting them to understand the practicalities and the realities of a truck. They have blind spots, they are large, they take a lot of time, they turn different, all those sort of components, getting them to see through the truck driver's eyes. And the aim is when all these are working together, we hopefully reduce the risk. But it will still be there because the trucks still have to move through our cities. But the other thing is have them move as efficient as possible, so they're not rotating, trying to wait to get into a site as they move along. So this is the CLOCS-A standard, as you'll see here. We mentioned it by a number of risk-based approach, so bronze, silver, gold. So depending where it is, depends what the risk scale is going to be for the program. To assist with that, there's a project rating tool. There's vulnerable road user awareness that's been created to flow through, and we've mapped out very clearly as to what those tiers represent for the different sort of levels of the driver. And this is basically an example of just a small snippet of the silver, which is the baseline, which sort of aligns with exactly what's there already in the Sydney Metro, major Melbourne sort of projects in place. So really drawing on what they've done. Where we've got different is in the accreditation and the auditing that underpins it to make sure it's all in place as it moves forward. So that is really what we've been pulling together. Case studies, all these components. I recommend going and having a look at the CLOCS-A website, and you can see all the elements that have been produced for this. The whole aim was to make life as easy as possible for Filter. We're going to be taking it forward in the implementation, operationalise of it all, which we've sort of managed to secure $300,000 to support them in doing that. So over to you, Karen, to talk about the next stage.
You're on mute, Karen. While Karen just gets mute sorted out, I'll just ask everyone to put questions into the Q&A. We will have question time after this. So put your questions into Q&A and then we can make sure we've got the most popular questions asked. Over to you, Karen, but yep.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, the mouse just wouldn't work on the screen. So yeah, so Jerome's covered where we've got to as far as developing the standard and developing where we need to get to. So what we need to do now is actually drive forward with what we do in implementing this. So basically, if we look at the vision of what CLOCS-A is about, it's about really to ensure that it's the safest, the leanest, and the greatest construction vehicle journey that occurs when we're applying that out there in a practical environment. And in doing that, how do we identify that these vehicles are actually applying the standards that they've agreed to in their contracts? And how do we identify the vehicles and the companies that are participating under this? So this standard will have identifying labeling, like we see here with the CLOCS-A in the gold and the bronze. The silver seems to have gone amiss there. But it's a national standard for construction logistics that prioritize. These companies are prioritizing safety, and their aim is to reduce the risk of harm to pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists. And so keeping that in mind, and with those operators applying these standards, we aim to see a reduction in road trauma between construction vehicles and the community, an increase in productivity and efficiency, fewer heavy vehicle journeys, improved quality air and reduced emissions because of the types of vehicles that are being used in such environments, and a reduced reputational risk. And what's the benefits for for CLOCS-A communities is that it reduces accidents and improves safety for the cyclists and vulnerable road users, including pedestrians. It minimises traffic congestion and noise and pollution, and it enhances community engagement and promotes sustainable development. But the benefits for businesses is that it's enhanced safety for all road users, the improved efficiency of deliveries and collections, and it has a positive impact on brand and reputation of customer relationships. And now that this standard is established, it actually outlines the roles and responsibilities, as Jerome's covered just a moment ago, of key stakeholders in construction. It also includes planning and regulatory authorities, government clients, developers, construction principal contractors, and road transport companies. Accreditation is awarded in these three-tiered approach. I do have the silver now, he's found his way back. So we've got bronze, silver, and gold, depending on those companies meeting certain criteria as set out in the standard. And in rolling this standard out, we have a timeline, and this timeline, and this is the work still to be completed. We still have the auditor framework and the system to work through. We're almost there. It just needs a little bit of refinement. We will then work on a back-end support system for those organisations applying for this standard, and us obviously keeping record of that. And then, of course, we have auditor recruitment and training, looking at the auditors that we already have that have reasonable experience in assessing such standards, and then what further training they may or may not be required to do. After that, we'll have the system and implementation going live, some industry engagement around that implementation on feedback and how that system is working for them in a true working environment. So some might call that as testing if you're talking about systems. And then, of course, the launch. And as you can see, the timeline there is a short window of time, all being well. And all being well, that the system does work in its test environment, the launch would be there towards the end of October, perhaps early November. I'm strict on timelines, so we'll see what happens there. CLOCS auditors, what will they focus on? Well, they will focus on 3 areas. They'll focus on trucking audits, organisational site audits, and the construction audits. The auditor themselves, their requirements will be potential CLOCS-A auditors. They'll apply as an auditor. They'll be assessed against a selection criteria. They will be required to have completed training and have a lead auditor qualification, a white card, and be trained in traffic management. The applications will be received and will be referred to an administrating team who will look after the auditors for assessment and approval. And there will be an application fee for the auditors on application and an annual fee for them to retain their licence. The CLOCS-A standard will focus on vehicles and sites. So the nominated vehicles that pass an audit by the auditors are given these accreditation labels, which are fitted to vehicles following accreditation, and they are easily identified, as we've mentioned before. And the sites, the construction sites or the various sites, office sites of offices doing development, those sites must also pass a CLOCS audit and be provided with a CLOCS-A audit accreditation logo, depending on the category that they are applying and pass for. And they have to be displayed on the entry nominated, the site that's been, the entry of a nominated site that's receiving that accreditation. There's also identification logos that are used to nominated sites, and this must be displayed on the sites. And the ones that aren't accredited cannot be displayed or cannot display these signs. So there's multiple levels of government responsible for the delivery of infrastructure and development projects, and these will also go through an accreditation process. As we all know, there's major infrastructure projects underway across the nation, especially in Victoria and New South Wales at the moment. And so they're represented and funded by either federal, state, or in some cases, local government. But when we look at local government comes in 4 different categories too. So these various levels of local government will also be applying for accreditation on the various projects that are underway within their jurisdiction. The stakeholder group, being the planning authorities and regulators, well, they're responsible for approving construction projects and issuing conditions for compliance. So they're on board and looking forward to being assessed accordingly. Their role is to ensure that the construction projects take a practical measure to mitigate traffic and transport impacts, whilst also monitoring and reporting on any breaches of the conditions set under the CLOCS-A standard. And the processes need to be in place to manage any instance of breach and ensure corrective remedial action is underway. When we look at the industry, we also have 4 tiers there, and they're categorised in various categories, and they also will go through an audit. They will actually look at how they fund their principal contractors for infrastructure and major projects, how they manage the risks, the safety and planning and design, and how they ensure that CLOCS-A compliant contractors and operators are used. They also monitor and assure that CLOCS-A accreditation is reported on, and any incidents are reported and captured and reported, and ensure that the community engagement and communication is also maintained. And the risk rating tool that CLOCS-A has developed and the haulage route assessments can be used to help in the management of the CLOCS-A standard as an ongoing process. Construction companies with their own fleets, and we have a number of different size fleets across the nation, small, medium, large and extra large, and as you can see there's quite a number there. They will also be invited to take up the CLOCS accreditation process. And then of course we have the principal contractors by the clients that will manage project safety and coordinate site activities. They will need to be CLOCS-A accredited if they're working under these contracts. They will be required to conduct risk assessments, investigate haulage routes, develop traffic management plans, procure compliant transport operators and ensure that heavy vehicles are valid, had valid licenses and training, and that they provide specific induction to and have drug and alcohol policies in place, strict ones, monitor safety and compliance, and report incidents and complaints, and engage with the community as well. And last of all, we have the transport operators, and they come in 4 categories as well, and that's based on the ATO categories. Their role will be to control heavy vehicles from a construction site, ensuring safety, driver fitness, and promoting safe driving. So the logistics measures will be to make sure that they minimise the risk to the community, they alternate transport modes, they use alternative modes where they need to, higher productivity vehicles are used as part of the process, that consolidating loads and deliveries, and they aim to reduce vehicle movements, emissions and fuels and consumptions based on safety and risks to the community. So the importance of CLOCS-A is to ensure safer roads by improving construction logistics to reduce accidents. It saves lives, it creates awareness, and it builds trust in communities. And basically, as a concluding comment, is by joining CLOCS, you can become part of the movement to create safer roads in Australia and support sustainable construction logistics. For more information, you can visit clocs-a.org.au if you want to know more about it. And thank you for considering the importance of the community and safety in Australia. I'd like now to hand over to Matthew.
Thanks, Karen. And just while Matthew's getting set up, there are lots of questions coming through, which is fantastic. Please like the questions that you're interested in so that we make sure we get the most popular questions answered. Thanks, Matt.
Everyone see that? All right, this is, so thanks a lot, Karen. There's some really good information there, and Jerome as well. There was some really good information in your presentation. The reason why they brought me along is I actually sought this process out, this voluntary code, and wanted to get on board with it because at Ashiona, we're building a number of large projects, so especially in Sydney and across the nation. And it's more about documenting the way we do business. We're currently working on a large number of projects. You know, there are projects like North Connect, Western Sydney Airport bulk earthworks, West Connect 3A, Metro Tunnel Package, and Western Harbour Tunnel we've just started. So we're doing a lot of large projects. So what was the need and the driver? Basically effective management of heavy vehicles. It's not enough to just be operating or to ring up companies, get subcontractors to come in and be moving the material. We're actually accountable under the chain of responsibility to actually make sure that our trucks are in peak condition, our loads are compliant to drive on the road, and that our operators, the truck drivers, are adhering to all the road rules and looking at their mass management and their speed across the network. If a truck's involved in an incident, they're basically coming back to us. So we look at it from what we can affect. We need to take that. We need to take that up and basically work with our contractors to get the best result possible across the network. With that first photo I brought up, which was Western Sydney Airport, just to give you a bit of an idea, out of West Connect 3A, which is one of our tunnelling projects right in the centre of Sydney, right near Sydney Airport, at Mascot Airport, we moved some 5 million cubic metres out of that, 5 million tonnes, which is 2.5 million cubic metres out of that project. We were lucky enough to actually move it out to one of our projects. So we're able to bookend our project and actually understand what were some of the limitations and issues that we had. And by bringing a lot of the metro standards in and transport standards, and then providing sort of an overview of what we saw value in, which was implementing all of the information which is in CLOCS-A, we were able to have successful projects. If I look back, we have had driving trucks in Sydney, especially in a heavy urban environment, is a really hard task for the truck driver. Generally, when a truck driver gets into an incident, where there has been a potential fatality or an injury, then usually everyone thinks it's the truck driver's fault. By having a process in place like CLOCS-A, you're able to, we were able in an incident that we had, to exonerate the truck driver at the end of the day. So the truck driver hadn't done anything wrong. His truck was compliant, his load was compliant, he was doing the right thing. It was actually a mistake by a cyclist who decided to try and beat the truck driver. So as sad as that was, and it really is for the cyclist, the family, people who saw it in the street, but at the same time, we're able to help our truck driver in going about his normal day's business, and him not having that, what could I have done? What if I had better this and better that? The truck driver hadn't done anything wrong. So I think that's the biggest bit to me, in the sense of trying to prevent the incident from occurring. Trying to look at the truck flow and get the right amount of trucks within the fleet and within that load and haul. But it's also to actually, it's also aimed at efficiency. So we've sort of started this journey probably at North Connect, moving heavily into Western Sydney Airport, West Connect 3A, and then moving through to our Metro Central Tunnel package, and then through to Western Harbour Tunnel and future projects. How did we do it? So we obviously have a fairly heavy selection process, and we make sure our truck drivers, especially on our mass hauls, are HV&L accredited. The idea of the HV&L accreditation is we don't have to do as much work because we know that those contractors are actually up to a standard and their trucks are up to that standard as well. We have a bespoke system within the company called LinkSight. LinkSight basically, we look at it, at a system that we can GPS track our trucks. We can look at the speed, the location the truck driver's in. That can be good for complaints and other things. If they do come in, we can actually say whether that is one of our trucks or whether it's another contractor. Ensuring they're following the designated routes and they don't take the rat runs, which can get us in trouble. When we get close to within those urban environments, we put G-loops together where it's an agreed road where they can actually drive around, because we don't want those tailbacks coming out of our sheds and things. We don't want to affect the local traffic. We don't want to have trucks hiding in hidey holes around the place. We want to make it as efficient for the truck driver as possible. We sort of look at it as though, being next to the airport, we look at it as like an aircraft traffic control system where we can see the trucks like on the right-hand side. Because normally a truck driver will tell us that they're actually closer than what they are, and we don't want them to rush. So we want to really influence the behaviour of the truck driver. We overlay all of the traffic information into our system as well, so they can see and we can see that the traffic's not moving quickly within an area, and we can reschedule or push them to another shed or another dive site to allow the most efficiency for us, but also not pushing the drivers to drive erratically. That's the aim of that. So what are we currently doing? We're taking ownership of our heavy vehicles. Once upon a time on previous projects, we've been doing this for a while, we would call a truck up or get a trucking company to come in, or a series of trucking companies, and we'd sort of say, hey, we need material moved from A to B. They would basically manage themselves. Now what we try and do is we manage in 3 different categories. We talk about inbound third-party deliveries. We talk about project haulage and routine haulage, and then we talk about project haulage non-routine. So project third-party deliveries is things by couriers, things by companies where Asciona and our partners don't actually know who will be delivering it, but it's going to be delivered by a company, and we'll work with those companies to tell them or to deliver a standard to them of what we expect. We're trying to get our materials landed so we know how it's going to fit on the truck and it can be tied down, and then how that load's going to be delivered and what loading and unloading tools we need when it gets to us. Then I've got project haulage routine, which is our mass hauls, with spoil material moving from our tunnel boring machines and from our road header sites out and across Sydney. And then we've got mass deliveries of precast concrete, like on the right-hand side, which is a photo of our Central Tunnel project. So we've got some 76,000 segments to actually move across Sydney. So we want to make sure they're moved in the most efficient way, but also they're held onto the truck in a repeatable manner. So therefore the truck driver knows that it's a design load and that we know that it's a design load, and we can audit that to make sure we're doing what we say we're going to do. Then we've got project haulage, non-routine, which is infrequent one-off deliveries. It might be machines being delivered, it might be refueling and other. It's not a catch-all, but we're trying to work on our bigger elements and then expand that out to the smaller elements. Hence why CLOCS-A is a very good system. This is my last slide. So as I said, we talk about GPS tracking. So we track the truck drivers at a second interval. So we know exactly how fast our truck drivers are moving across the network. That can be done via their phones on an app, or it can be done with a black box fairly cheaply fitted to a vehicle or to a machine. We also have a thing called a load restraint diagram, and the load restraint diagram is basically temporary works. So we have a temporary works drawing of how we give that to the truck driver. We tell the truck driver what chains, what rubber they need, what the sling angles need to be, so they can actually tie that load on with the surety that that load won't come off if they put the brake on in anger, which is a real success for us in the sense the truck drivers really appreciate that, because anyone who's ever driven a truck, when someone ducks it in front of you or something occurs and you've got to slam your foot on the anchor and you start to hear that load move or the chains tighten, it's not a good feeling. So what are the outcomes? A safer road network, and that's a safer road network for the travelling public, but it's also, you know, school kids, school zones, anyone likely to come in contact with our trucks moving across the network. Improved productivity. A lot of our engineers used to say to me that we're actually reducing our productivity, but then they've seen a gain in productivity where we can have the right amount of trucks moving across the network, not too many, not too few. And then we can also, you know, talk to our truck drivers across the network in the sense of if we have an issue, so they know what's occurring and they don't have to rush, and we get that right behaviour across the network. If we have any people who don't follow the rules, we give them a warning, and if they don't take the warning, we remove them from working for us. Consistent industry standards. This is one that I'm really interested in. By bringing CLOCS-A and using the CLOCS-A standard, then it's the same standard for everyone, especially in pricing, and then it gives us the deliverable result at the end of the day, and that's what we're after. We're after repeatable performance. We're not after asking the trucking companies to do something different. We're after all the trucking companies to do the same thing. So that's why, just in conclusion, CLOCS-A is a good way of doing business, and it's really the only way of doing business. And I think what you'll see is local, state and federal governments, especially in contracts, pushing the requirement for CLOCS-A. And I implore everyone to jump on board, because it really is a good thing. And as I said, it can lift safety, productivity, and it's a better way of doing business. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt. And thanks, everyone. It's a really interesting look at what this project is all about, what's coming up for the implementation, and what it means to be doing this in practice. So we do have a number of questions in the Q&A, which is fantastic. And I'll just start off with one, given the history that this has arisen from the CLOCS program in England, if there are any key differences between CLOCS-A and the original CLOCS to be aware of.
That's a great question. And I guess when we sort of formed CLOCS-A, one of the key things we signed was a memorandum of understanding with Transport for London and CLOCS over in the UK, so we could really draw, and there's been regular sharing through that. But there are some big differences between Australia and the United Kingdom when we're going through. There's a lot of standards which are just business as usual over there, which are built into under EU and UK legislation, so we had to take all those sort of elements into consideration. So we've sort of gone through and adapted it. We also had to look at creating a, I guess, an auditing framework that sits behind it as well, And I know Adam's asked a few questions on that, and Karen will be able to talk to that in more detail as I've been moving through. But we've had to give it the rigour to go through, because CLOCS in the UK taps into a number of FORs and a few other auditing programs over there to make sure they're all meeting the requirements as per the CLOCS standard. So when we've gone through a lot of elements which we've had to interact into, the CLOCS-A program reflect that. And we've also gone through another one, I guess, a risk-based approach by having bronze, silver, gold that really reflects. So it's not trying to say, look, if you're operating out maybe in some really regional areas where there's not the vulnerable road use a risk, there's ways we can sort of reflect it all the way through. And that's where we sort of went through in looking at from a risk-based approach. This is the best standard for this area. This is the best standard for this approach. And the other part is by having 3 tiers in it, it creates a continuous improvement approach so people can see what's coming along and they can prepare for it, which is very similar to what happened in the UK with CLOCS and the Fleet Operator Recognition Scheme.
Great, thanks, Jerome. We've got a question here around fatigue and the difference in the standards for truck drivers in Australia compared within the EU. How does this program impact on fatigue? Matthew, perhaps can you talk about what your experiences are?
Yeah, I think by electronic monitoring, like I talked about with our link site system, we're able to really monitor the fatigue right from where the truck drivers leave wherever they're keeping their truck, whether it's their home garage or their company factory unit. I'm not 100% sure of what the rules are in Europe, but at the same time, it's a very repeatable process in the sense of making sure that your truck drivers are actually working within their HPNL accredited processes in the sense of the hours that they're allowed to work. As I said again, it's more around making sure they're taking their breaks, making sure the breaks are long enough, and then you're able to see where they're taking their breaks in the sense of, you know, we have a rule over here where you can't take a break in a queue. You've got to have the potential of being able to get out of your truck, stretch your legs. You don't have to get out of your truck, but in general, you have the ability to take that time off of where you aren't thinking. So that's about the best I can answer that question at the moment.
Thank you. We've got questions around the certification. Who is actually being certified? Is it just the trucking company? And how do these standards relate to the national pre-qualification scheme for road and bridge construction managed by Austroads?
Well, it's probably not just the construction company. It's the construction company, it's the transport operators, and it could even be site officers of construction companies, or those that are contracting to the construction company, i.e. government entities, local government sites that hold sites that are looking at particular projects within a community, development projects, even maintenance projects that involve the use of construction type vehicles. So that's probably the 3 categories sit in government for that reason, as well as your construction sites and developers, and then of course the vehicles that are used in these.
And on that, Ingrid, I guess the key part is where the site is located. That anchors exactly what supply chain risk that goes to it. So, for example, one of Matt's sites in central Sydney, that would be sort of silver, and that means every vehicle that goes to it has to be silver accredited, no matter what size it is as well. So the site becomes the anchor for what the tier that supplies to it.
And how will it relate to the program managed by Austroads?
That's one we probably haven't really explored, but it's on, I guess, on the list which we can look at. So we've really just focused on the construction sites from that point, but I think that's an opportunity to take on board. That's great.
Thank you. Is there involvement of any vulnerable road user groups in the development of this? Has there been, or are there plans to do that, perhaps?
Vulnerable road, they've been very active in it, and that's what's probably one of the real strengths. I think with TG1 as a perfect example, yes, that's been based around vehicle safety standards, and We had Bastian Wallace, who was at New South Wales Cycling Group, but they've been involved all the way through. There's been Amy Gillett Foundation, Bicycle Queensland. Those groups have been very active and contributed to it in different sort of levels. Some have been driver training, some have been vehicle safety, some have been comms, some have been logistics, and that's probably been the really good spread. It hasn't just been experts from the heavy vehicle sector. You know, the key stakeholders come in and really, and that's how when you develop a risk-based approach, it's all around consultation and collaboration. And each of those streams have gone through and done exactly that. Even Lime was another example that's been on board.
Great, thanks. Are there objective measures of success of the project? And if so, what are they?
Well, the project has KPIs that we have to adhere to as well. So as the host organisation, we're working towards a successful and sustainable entity in CLOCS-A as a regulation that actually focuses on the safety of the community. So our KPI is a reduction in incidents in the construction sites, within the vehicles travelling and carting material to and from construction sites. So overall, the success really is governed by the reduction in deaths, unfortunately, in incidents, and there's better community safety and awareness out there as a result. What better KPI?
Has the CLOCS project in the UK got objective metrics that we can learn from?
And that's where I had industry complaints, and there's a number of sort of components which I've voted up in the packs, and we're sort of consulting quite frequently with them all. There is a communications evaluation framework as well, which you'll see on the website, that actually maps it out as well to measure attitudes of the community towards trucks and community projects as well. So that's all been sort of created as part of the foundation elements of it. And the other part, I guess, the other success is CLOCS in the UK is actually about to kick off and revisit their own standard, and they'll sort of be drawing on the learnings from the CLOCS-A approach as well.
Great, thank you. What are the qualifications that auditors are going to have? Will they be mechanical qualifications, or what's the expectation there?
Well, I think it'll be a mixture of different things. The NHVAS auditors are the ones that we are focusing on at the moment, that may initially be auditors moving forward for CLOCS-A, given that they already have that knowledge and experience. However, that's up to the auditor whether they want to participate or not. We're not saying they all must. For those interested, we would kick off with those as auditors and train those accordingly as needed moving forward. But that's where our focus point is talking to those already with the knowledge and the experience to do an effective role, such as audit.
So we also looked at some of the other models around the place, things with CRANESAFE and others, and we looked at how were they operating, and we said that we wanted to create a model that had an audit for the auditors as well, in the sense that the auditors were up to a standard, and that standard was continually being carried out. It wasn't a case of where companies would be going to another state to drag an auditor in. Not saying CRANESAFE do that, but just in general to get that level of accreditation so that it is the same across the country, not just from one auditing group. We want that standard to be repeatable across the whole of the CLOCS-A process.
Great. And we've got a question around getting community involved. So if you've got a massive construction project that's going to start, how, as members of the community, do we urge local council and the developers for the project to implement the CLOCS criteria, particularly with the project involving very many large trucks interacting with primary age children going to and from school? Is there an opportunity to encourage legislation requiring CLOCS in areas where there is high vulnerable road user activity, if they're near schools, for example?
I think what you'll see is, like with a lot of large government projects across Sydney and within other major cities across Australia, that government are requesting a series of standards, and where standards don't exist, they'll write their own. So we're seeing that with the metro projects, we're seeing it with other transport projects like Western Harbour Tunnel, and we're also seeing it with contractors sort of looking at it and going, hey, that's a good way of doing business. So for the ones that don't come along, they'll be basically excluded, but they'll have the opportunity to join, but they need to follow the standard that the principal contractor is setting across their project. And normally we're in lockstep with our government or clients' requirements as well. So it's just a good way of doing business, and it also stops any ill will against a project by having, you know, effective means of moving these truckloads. So we're allowed to move a certain amount of truckloads. Obviously, the weights and volumes and everything have got to be right. There's a lot of community consultation. You know, we're engaging schools as well within the area. A lot of our systems have school zones built in, so we know when a truck driver or when we haven't been behaving well in those areas, and then we can basically pull those people in and sort of go, hey, that's not the way we do business. Yeah, so there's a lot of community, a lot of requirements by clients to engage the community, but it's a real threat to us if we don't engage the community and be good corporate citizens.
So what's the role for state and local planners and regulators within the framework? How can those stakeholders prepare effectively and positively to receive and implement CLOCS-A?
So it's probably another one for me. I think creating a level playing field, whether it be local council or whether it be on small projects and, you know, areas that are being fixed up, so that the community then expect a set standard of what that looks like. People are worried about, or trucking companies and others are worried about spending money, you know, on site intrusion, on blind spot alarms and other things, if they don't get the work that they need to pay for those systems and basically get the kudos that they've moved up to that standard. So I think the federal, state and local government need to just include that within the requirements for those projects, so that it is a level playing field and it is one standard, giving the highest level of community safety, and also safety and wellbeing for the truck drivers as well.
Thank you. We've got a question around costs and who pays. Is it done preemptively? Will the costs scale? What can we say about the costs and who pays? How that works?
You're on mute, Karen.
The costs are aligned to each of the tiers that I showed in some of my slides. So you have the 4 tiers of local government, you have the 4 tiers of transport operators, the 4 tiers of construction companies, and each of those tiers has varying prices aligned to it. Those prices are soon to be released. We've got that going. We've got that paper together. We just need endorsement on 1 or 2 of those tables where we've allocated or identified another tier of local government and allocate that fee to it. And there's also fees according to the accreditation level that people credit to. The auditors pay their license fee each year, and we also have an application fee for the auditors because they go through an assessment process.
Great, thank you. And what will the mix be of documentation audit versus ground truthing? Who checks that the work's actually done in the same way as the paperwork says it will be?
We have an online tool that we have looked at and identified called iAuditor. It actually is something that can be used out in the field as well as in an office. It captures pretty much a site audit into an office environment. It's assessed by an auditor, and basically, depending on the situation, who they're assessing, they go out and check a site, they check the processes, they check the record of incidents, the risks management. All those elements are part of the assessment process and captured and assessed by the auditors doing that audit. And it's all captured as part of a profile around those particular organisations that are accredited against various levels, and also those showing and demonstrating the sign that they are CLOCS accredited. And that's an audit that is underway, pretty much before accreditation is given.
Thank you. And will existing projects be required to join?
I think it's all part of a journey. I think once you had a project up and running, it's hard unless you've got another aspect of work kicking off. Like you might have a big haul to do, or you might have a large amount of concrete precast product coming in. But I think with a lot of those bigger projects, they've already got it. I think you need to set the rules right at the start for the subcontractors. But it doesn't hurt, obviously, starting off at bronze and working your way to silver and then obtaining gold. It's a journey that you need to go on. I remember back to, some of the trucks that we've had on projects, 20-something years ago, and they were horrible in the sense of they were full of rust and not very roadworthy, I could say. But if you look at the standard of truck now, the lift in government rules and regulations, especially around registration and things like that, it has improved the industry enormously, but it still has a way to come. So I think it's an ongoing process, and you need to start and then look at your future employment, because you can't just line up and go, hey, I'll just obtain gold. You have to work your way to it. So I think that's probably where I would start if I was a contractor. And obviously the contractors, as in the principals, it's for them to start looking at where they want their trucking fleets and the efficiencies that they can gain out of the CLOCS-A process.
Thank you. A question around insurance. Is it likely that any insurers might insist on CLOCS-A accreditation? Have those discussions happened at all?
I guess that's one that we left to the insurance. We haven't had any of those discussions. The focus has really been on pulling it all together and just think who we can bring into the fold. But if it is, that's another carrot to add to incentive to be part of it.
Maybe we say we are happy to have those discussions with the insurance companies that would like to be involved.
On the issue of safer vehicles, is there a requirement for automated emergency braking, electronic stability control to prevent rollovers, black boxes for crash investigations?
I'll have to look at the different tiers, but I think that might be a silver level. It's built in. So you have to just look at the different sort of tiers in that sort of area. I know ESC sort of mandated through it.
And here's a very, very simple question. CLOCS-A is a terrific risk-based approach and program of implementation. It's sad that CLOCS-A standards are years ahead of Australian national standards. Why wouldn't CLOCS-A be included in the National Road Safety Strategy? I know you all want to answer that question.
Well, the best thing is it's in the action plan. So it's in the current action plan. It's supposed to be effective from 2025. I was having a look in there just prior when I saw that comment come on. So it's in the actual action plan as well.
So the implementation happening this year will be ahead of the action plan date then?
Yes.
Do you anticipate that you'll continue to require NHVAS accreditation once CLOCS-A is in place? That was a question for Matthew.
I might throw that in my direction. I think we'll basically naturally go to the highest standard. We won't be requiring multiple standards, but we'll have contractors at all different levels. So I think you've got to then start ticking the boxes of what does that actually, how many boxes does that tick within the CLOCS-A process? And that'll be a precursor to what contractors you'll be letting onto your project to move that material. Because as I said, we've got routine and non-routine, and obviously the routine stuff will be directly applicable to the CLOCS-A standard. And obviously some of the non-routine stuff, although we want everything to be, but we've got to be a realist as well. So we'll have different companies being at different standards moving across until we get that critical mass. So I think that's important. You can't cut your nose off to spite your face. You have to be dealing with everyone and try and influence those contractors to bring them through. So obviously the HVNL is a standard that a majority of our companies have picked up, and especially with the mass halls and things like that. That's been highly successful. But moving forward, it will progress to CLOCS-A gold standard down the track.
Great. This is another fatigue question. Much large construction in Australia occurs overnight to avoid disruption in the community. This needs to be acknowledged in setting effective work and rest schedules for drivers who are only obtaining rest during the day. CLOCS-A could take the lead in setting safe working hours rules for this setting. Has this been discussed at all?
Yeah, it's really interesting because we have our major clients telling us that we can't. We have so many rules and regulations on upsetting anyone within the community, any other vulnerable road user, and across the system in general. So it's a case of a lot of our work, unfortunately, has to be done at night, and obviously by strict monitoring of those people working, we can help, and obviously getting reputable companies working with us, because we have had companies that we've found where people have been working during the day and then working all night, and we discourage that enormously. As I said, we need to talk to our people, we need to talk to our contractors, and we need to make sure that that's not occurring, and we need to make sure that we're helping our truck drivers as much as possible, but also supporting our truck drivers and giving them the voice to be able to speak out against, unscrupulous truck owners and other even construction companies that don't do the right thing. So I think it's a case of giving them a voice, but giving them a better place to work on projects like ours.
Thank you. And it might be the last question. Are you planning on having CLOCS champions like they do in the UK for those companies or organisations that actively promote and help to implement the national standards?
Without doubt, that's been sort of built into it, and to make sure we can sort of promote. And that's what the case studies are really sort of drawing on, highlighting those areas, because I think the goal is a lot of companies and organisations are doing this as BAU. So we want to really highlight and spotlight on best practice and use it as incentives where they can jump over competitors and peers, like they do in the CLOCS program in the UK. The other one is the case study template is actually based on the Sydney Metro template for the case studies, because in the new contracts that have gone out, it's a requirement that all suppliers into their contracts have to produce a case study. So we've now adopted that, and I think it's flowed through into Victoria as well. And that's an example of, instead of creating our own sort of approaches, we're developing it on. So anything that they submit into the Sydney Metro ones would meet a CLOCS-A requirement and be laid out. But champions are how we want to grow it and push it forward.
Great. So any last 30-second words from any of the speakers?
I think just in general, you're crazy if you don't get on board with it, because it's the way of the future, and it'll be a requirement on large infrastructure projects and moving down all the way through to local government. I think you'll start seeing it in tenders, and as I said, it's been well put together, and I think industry in general will receive it well, and it'll be interesting to see the uptake back through Karen's group, SILTA.
Great.
I agree with Matthew. It has been well put together, and we've had good, strong representation as part of the steering group. Very good representation and support from government, and it's actually quite exciting for us. We're looking forward to the launch and actually putting this in practice. And with what I've read and what is still I'm still exploring and discovering as part of this, I'm just so excited to be part of it.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks very much to our speakers, Jerome, Karen, and Matt. And thanks very much to the audience for joining us today. Lots and lots of questions. We couldn't get through them all, and I apologize for that. But it's just the beginning of the conversation. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.